Daniel stood inside the massive space station, Velka Prime, feeling entirely too small. The station, floating in the middle of neutral space, was larger than any human city. The walls stretched endlessly, glowing with strange blue lights. Ships of different alien races docked at the ports, their pilots moving around in colorful uniforms. Earth had sent Daniel as a diplomat to negotiate with the Drelzek, one of the strongest warrior races in the galaxy. The Drelzek valued power above all else, and humans were, well, not exactly famous for their strength. Still, Earth had something valuable: strategy and intelligence. Humans had a way of thinking that many alien races did not. That was why Daniel was here. He was good at talking, at convincing, at finding solutions that others missed. But he hadn't expected her. Daniel stared up, way up, at the towering figure before him. His new bodyguard, a Drelzek warrior named Ryazan, was at least 8 feet tall. Her dark indigo skin gleamed under the station's artificial lights, her golden eyes glowing like embers. A thick braid of black hair rested over one shoulder, and her armor, dark silver with sharp edges, looked almost alive. Her arms were crossed, her sharp jaw set in a firm line. She was not impressed. "You are the human." Ryazan's voice was deep and smooth, but there was something cold about it. Daniel adjusted his suit, trying to look as professional as possible. "That's me, Daniel Reeves, diplomat from Earth." He held out a hand, but Ryazan didn't take it. She looked down at his hand, then at his face. "I was told you would be fragile." Daniel let out a small laugh. "Nice to meet you too." Ryazan narrowed her eyes. "This is not about meeting. I am here to guard you. Nothing more." Daniel dropped his hand, stuffing it into his pocket. "Well, I appreciate the help." "I do not care for your appreciation," Ryazan replied, turning sharply. "Follow me. Do not slow me down." Daniel sighed and walked after her. This was going to be a long assignment. The Drelzek were known for their strength and discipline. Their warriors trained from a young age, and by the time they reached adulthood, they were nearly unstoppable in battle. Ryazan was one of their best. She had fought in countless wars, won battles against creatures twice her size, and never once failed a mission. And now, her new job was guarding a human diplomat. She had protested at first. The council had dismissed her complaints. "This human is important," they had told her. "Ensure his safety." So here she was, protecting a creature that looked weak enough to be knocked over by a strong breeze. Ryazan led Daniel through the station, her sharp gaze scanning every corner. The hallways were filled with diplomats, traders, and warriors from different planets. Some stopped to look at Daniel. Humans were still a rare sight in this part of the galaxy. Daniel ignored the stares. He was used to them by now. Instead, he focused on keeping up with Ryazan's long strides. "So," he said after a while, "do you always walk this fast?" Ryazan didn't slow down. "Yes." Daniel sighed. "Great." After several minutes, they arrived at a large chamber. The room was grand, with towering pillars and a circular table in the center. Seated around it were powerful figures from different species. At the head of the table sat High Commander Varzan, leader of the Drelzek delegation. His deep red armor glowed under the lights, and his piercing yellow eyes locked onto Daniel as he entered. "You are the human representative," Varzan said, his voice like distant thunder. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." Varzan studied him for a moment before speaking. "The Drelzek do not trust words alone, human. We trust strength. Tell me, why should we listen to you?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Daniel. Some of the aliens smirked, waiting to see the human fail. Daniel could feel Ryazan standing beside him, completely still. He knew what they were thinking. They expected him to stammer, to shrink under the pressure. But Daniel had faced tough negotiations before, and if the Drelzek valued strength, then he would show them that humans had strength too, just a different kind. He stepped forward, and met Varzan's gaze. "Because we have something you don't," Daniel said calmly. Daniel smiled slightly. "The ability to win without fighting." Murmurs spread through the room. The Dralzek frowned. Some of the other delegates leaned forward with interest. Varzan's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Daniel took a breath. "Strength is important, but battles are not won by strength alone. Strategy, diplomacy, and intelligence, they are just as powerful. Earth may not have the strongest warriors, but we have survived against impossible odds because we know how to think. We know how to adapt. That is why I am here, to prove that an alliance with humanity is not a weakness, but a strength." For a moment, there was silence. Then Varzan let out a low chuckle. "Bold words, human. We shall see if you can back them up." He turned to Ryazan. "Keep him safe. If he dies, you have failed your mission." Ryazan bowed her head. "Understood, Commander." Daniel gave her a sideways glance. "No pressure, ha." Ryazan didn't reply. But as they left the chamber, she found herself looking at Daniel differently. Maybe, just maybe, this human was not as weak as she thought. Daniel followed Ryazan through the massive halls of Velka Prime, his steps quick as he tried to keep up with her long strides. It had only been a few hours since his arrival, and he already felt like a child walking beside a giant. The Dralzek warrior moved like a shadow, her dark silver armor making no sound. Her golden eyes scanned every corridor, every corner, as if expecting an attack at any moment. "You always this serious?" Daniel asked, trying to break the silence. Ryazan didn't look at him. A warrior does not waste time with useless talk. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Good thing I'm not a warrior then." Ryazan finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "That is clear." Daniel sighed. This was going to be harder than he thought. They reached the diplomatic hall, a vast chamber filled with representatives from different planets. Floating screens displayed trade agreements, security updates, and political discussions in dozens of alien languages. At the far end of the room, Ambassador Kale, the lead human diplomat, stood talking to a group of officials. He was an older man, calm and professional, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Daniel." Kale greeted him with a nod. "I hope your escort isn't too much trouble." Daniel glanced at Ryazan. "She's efficient." Kale smirked. "Good. We need that." Before Daniel could respond, a loud voice cut through the hall. "This is a waste of time." Daniel turned to see a tall, armored figure stepping forward. It was Jorven, a high-ranking Dralzek warrior. His red armor gleamed under the lights, and his deep blue skin made him look even more intimidating. He crossed his arms and looked down at Daniel. "Why should we respect a species that hides behind words? Humans talk too much. Strength decides who is worthy." Murmurs spread through the room. Some aliens nodded in agreement. The Dralzek respected power, and Daniel knew they saw humans as weak. Kale started to step in, but Daniel raised a hand, stopping him. He had dealt with people like Jorven before. If he let Kale handle this, the Dralzek would never take him seriously. Daniel looked up at the towering warrior and smiled. "All right, let's test that." Jorven frowned. "What?" Daniel took a step forward. "You believe strength is the only thing that matters, so let's have a challenge. You pick the test. If I win, you listen to what I have to say." The room went silent. Jorven stared at Daniel, then let out a short laugh. "You have courage, human. Very well. We shall have a test." He turned to Ryazan. "You are his guard. Choose a challenge." Ryazan looked at Daniel for a long moment, then back at Jorven. "A test of the mind," she said finally. Jorven frowned. "Mind." Ryazan nodded. "Humans claim their intelligence is their strength. Let the human prove it." Jorven grunted. "Fine. We shall play the Trazek strategy game, a game of war." A few aliens gasped. Trazek was an ancient Dralzek game, one played by warriors to train their minds for battle. It was not just about moving pieces. It required deep strategy and quick thinking. Daniel had never played before, but he didn't back down. "I accept," he said. Jorven smirked. "Then prepare to lose." A large table was brought into the center of the hall. The game board was placed on top, covered in small figures representing armies, commanders, and resources. Jorven sat on one side. Daniel took the other. Ryazen stood behind him, arms crossed. "You do not know the rules," she whispered. Daniel smiled. "I'll figure it out." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. A Dralzek official stepped forward. "The rules are simple. Each turn, you move your pieces to expand, defend, or attack. The goal is to control the battlefield and outmaneuver your opponent." Jorven placed his hands on the table. "We begin." The first few moves were simple. Jorven expanded aggressively, placing his warriors at key points on the board. Daniel studied the patterns, watching how his opponent moved. The Dralzek fought with brute force, taking territory quickly. But Daniel had played strategy games before. He knew that brute force had one weakness. It left gaps. Slowly, Daniel changed the pace. Instead of meeting Jorven's aggression, he used his moves to block key areas, forcing the Dralzek into tighter positions. The crowd murmured as they realized what was happening. Daniel wasn't fighting like a warrior. He was fighting like a tactician. Jorven scowled as Daniel cut off his reinforcements, trapping his main army in a vulnerable spot. "You play." Strangely, Jorven muttered. Daniel shrugged. "I play to win." A few more moves passed. Jorven couldn't recover. His army was surrounded, his strategy failing. Then, checkmate. The hall fell silent. Jorven stared at the board in disbelief. Daniel leaned back. "Well, do I have your attention now?" After a long pause, Jorven stood up and placed a fist over his chest. The Dralzek salute of respect. "You have won," he admitted. "Perhaps humans are not as weak as I thought." The room erupted in whispers. Ryazen, still standing behind Daniel, felt something unexpected, a small flicker of admiration. Maybe, just maybe, this human was different. Daniel sat on a balcony overlooking Velka Prime's central district. The space station was a wonder of engineering, with glowing towers stretching high and thousands of ships flying through the artificial sky. The air smelled metallic, and the distant hum of engines never stopped. He sighed, stretching his arms. Winning the Trazek strategy game against Jorven had been a small victory, but he knew it wasn't enough. The Dralzek still saw him as a weak human. He heard footsteps behind him. Heavy, controlled. "Ryazen, you should not sit in the open," she said. "It is dangerous." Daniel smiled without turning. "You think someone will attack me?" Ryazen stepped forward, her tall frame casting a shadow over him. "There are always enemies." He turned to look at her. Even in the dim light, her golden eyes glowed. She stood like a statue, her hands resting near the weapons on her belt. Daniel chuckled. "You take your job very seriously." She frowned. "You do not." "I do. But if I spent every moment thinking about danger, I'd lose my mind." Ryazen didn't answer. Instead, she sat down on the bench beside him, though the bench creaked under her weight. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Didn't expect you to sit." "I must stay close," she said simply. Daniel looked up at her, curiosity growing in his mind. "Can I ask you something?" Ryazen exhaled through her nose. "You will ask anyway." He grinned. "Fair point." He leaned forward. "What do you really think about humans?" She turned her head slightly, watching him. "You wish to know my true thoughts?" "Yes." She was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "At first, I thought your kind was weak. You are smaller, slower, and physically inferior to most species. The Dralzek respect strength, and humans do not seem strong." Daniel nodded. He had expected this. And now? Ryazen's golden eyes studied him. Now, I am not certain. Daniel blinked. Oh, you defeated Jorven in a strategy game, she said. That was unexpected. The Drelzek believe in the strength of the body, but you have shown strength of the mind. That is different. Daniel smirked. Different isn't bad, is it? Ryazen tilted her head slightly. No, it is not. For a moment, they sat in silence. The air between them felt lighter, less tense. Then, a voice crackled through Ryazen's communicator. Commander Varzan requests the human's presence. Now, Ryazen stood up immediately. We must go. Daniel sighed. Duty calls. He followed Ryazen, but as they walked, he couldn't help but feel something had changed between them. A small shift. An understanding. The council chamber was filled with high-ranking Drelzek warriors. The air was thick with authority, their golden eyes watching Daniel as he stepped inside. At the head of the room, Commander Varzan sat on an elevated throne-like chair. His crimson armor made him look even more imposing. Daniel and Ryazen stopped before him. Varzan leaned forward. You have caused much discussion, human. Daniel gave a polite nod. I assume that's a good thing. Varzan's lips curled slightly. Perhaps. Your strategy skills are impressive, but battles are not won on a game board. True power is proven in the field. Daniel folded his arms. Are you saying I need to fight someone? Varzan shook his head. Not fight. Survive. A hologram flickered to life beside him, displaying a distant moon covered in jagged mountains. This is Krelos 4, a training ground for our warriors, Varzan explained. It is home to dangerous creatures and extreme conditions. If you wish to prove that humans deserve our respect, you will go there and survive. Daniel's stomach tightened. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for survival missions. But he also knew that backing down wasn't an option. He took a deep breath. All right. When do we leave? Varzan's eyes gleamed. At dawn. Daniel glanced at Ryazen. She was watching him carefully, her expression unreadable. Something told him that this mission was going to be far more dangerous than he expected. The next morning, Daniel stood in front of a Drelzek dropship, wearing lightweight armor and a utility belt. He wasn't sure how much it would help, but at least it made him feel less like an easy target. Ryazen approached, dressed in her full battle armor. She held a small blade and handed it to him. You may need this, she said. Daniel took the weapon, feeling the weight in his palm. You really think I'll have to use it? Ryazen's expression was serious. Yes. Daniel sighed. Great. A loud horn signaled the start of the mission. The doors of the dropship opened, revealing the harsh landscape of Krelos 4. Jagged rocks, red skies, and distant creatures moving in the shadows. Daniel exhaled. Here goes nothing. He stepped forward, Ryazen right behind him. The Drelzek dropship roared as it left Daniel and Ryazen behind, its engines kicking up red dust from the barren surface of Krelos 4. Daniel adjusted his breathing mask, feeling the hot, dry air of the planet against his skin. The sky was a deep shade of crimson, and jagged mountains stretched as far as he could see. The ground was uneven, covered in sharp rocks and twisted alien plants that looked anything but friendly. Ryazen stood beside him, scanning the landscape with sharp golden eyes. She gripped her weapon tightly, her stance tense. This planet is not kind to the weak, she said. Daniel sighed. Yeah, I figured that much. A loud roar echoed from the distance, making Daniel's blood run cold. He turned his head toward the sound, his fingers instinctively tightening around the small blade Ryazen had given him. What was that? He asked. Ryazen's expression remained calm but serious. One of the predators. Many creatures roam this land. They will not hesitate to hunt us. Daniel exhaled slowly. Fantastic. Their mission was clear. Survive for 3 days in this hostile environment. No backup, no outside help. If he made it through, he would earn the respect of the Dralzek. If not, well, he didn't want to think about that. Into the wild. Ryazan took the lead, moving with a warrior's grace. Daniel followed, stepping carefully to avoid the loose rocks beneath his feet. The landscape was harsh, but he had been on enough survival missions back on Earth to know one golden rule. Find shelter first. Where do we set up camp? He asked. Ryazan pointed to a rock formation ahead. There, it will give us cover from flying predators. Daniel didn't question her. If there was one thing he had learned in the past few days, it was that Ryazan knew what she was doing. As they moved toward the rocks, Daniel kept his eyes on the horizon. The shadows in the distance seemed to move, and every now and then he swore he saw glowing eyes watching them. When they finally reached the rock formation, Ryazan began setting up defenses. She placed small motion sensor devices around the perimeter. Draxec technology that would alert them if anything approached. Daniel, meanwhile, started gathering dry alien plants to make a fire. It wasn't much, but it would provide warmth and light when night fell. You are efficient, Ryazan observed as she watched him work. Daniel smirked. Survival training. Earth isn't always safe either, you know. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Perhaps your kind is more capable than I thought. Daniel chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. A midnight visitor. As the red sun dipped below the horizon, darkness swallowed Krelosphore. The temperature dropped rapidly, and a cold wind howled through the mountains. Daniel sat near the small blue fire, rubbing his hands together for warmth. Ryazan remained standing, her eyes scanning the night like a silent sentinel. Then, a rustling sound. Ryazan turned sharply, her hand going to her weapon. Daniel froze. What was that? Before she could answer, something moved just beyond the light of the fire. A low growl rumbled through the air, and Daniel could barely make out the shape of a large creature crouching in the darkness. It had 6 glowing red eyes and a long, sleek body covered in dark, armored scales. Its claws dug into the ground, and its tail swayed back and forth like a predator preparing to strike. Daniel swallowed hard. That thing does not look friendly. Ryazan drew her weapon. It is a Gorvex, a nocturnal hunter. The creature let out a deep snarl and lunged forward. Ryazan moved first, slashing with her blade. The Gorvex twisted away at the last second, dodging her attack with incredible speed. Daniel barely had time to react before the beast turned toward him, its red eyes locking onto its next target. His instincts screamed run, but he knew that was useless. Instead, he raised the small blade Ryazan had given him. It felt laughably small compared to the monster in front of him. The Gorvex pounced. At the last second, Daniel dropped low, rolling under the creature's leap. As it landed, he slashed at its exposed leg, the blade cutting deep into its flesh. The beast let out a pained screech. Ryazan took the opening. She lunged forward, driving her weapon deep into the creature's side. The Gorvex roared, then staggered backward before collapsing onto the rocky ground. Daniel panted, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked at Ryazan, who was still standing in a battle stance, her golden eyes glowing in the dark. Slowly, she lowered her weapon. You fought well. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. I just reacted. I thought that thing was going to eat me. Ryazan smirked slightly. And yet, you did not freeze in fear. That is the difference between the weak and the strong. Daniel chuckled. Still alive, so I'll take that as a win. Ryazan gave a slow nod. Yes. A win. A growing respect. The night passed without further attacks, though Daniel didn't sleep much. He kept replaying the fight in his head, surprised by how instinctively he had reacted. Maybe he was stronger than he thought. As the first light of dawn touched Krelosphore, Ryazan walked up beside him. We move out soon, she said. Daniel stretched his arms. Where to? There is a river a few miles from here. If we reach it, we will have fresh water and better ground for defense. Daniel nodded. Sounds like a plan. As they packed up their gear, he noticed Ryazan watching him. What? He asked. She hesitated, then said, You are proving yourself human. Daniel grinned. Does that mean I finally have your respect? Ryazan smirked slightly. Not yet. Daniel laughed. Figures. With that, they set off across the red landscape, two warriors from different worlds, walking side by side. The real test was far from over. But something told Daniel that, for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. The red sun rose over Krillosphore, casting long shadows across the jagged landscape. Daniel and Ryazan moved swiftly over the rocky terrain, heading toward the river Ryazan had mentioned. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. The heat of the day was already setting in, making his armor feel heavier. He glanced at Ryazan, who walked with the same disciplined steps, showing no signs of exhaustion. Do Drolzek ever get tired? He asked, breathing hard. Ryazan barely glanced at him. Weakness is not tolerated among my kind. Daniel sighed. Right. Of course. Still, he kept moving. He wasn't about to slow her down. The river of life and death. After hours of walking, they finally reached the river. It was wide and fast-moving, cutting through the harsh land like a blue scar. The water was clear, reflecting the red sky above. Daniel crouched by the edge, scooping up water in his hands. It was ice-cold against his skin. He took a sip and let out a satisfied sigh. This is amazing, he said. Ryazan remained standing, scanning the area. Do not lower your guard. This is a hunting ground. Daniel looked up. For what? As if in answer, the water rippled. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Is the river supposed to do that? Before Ryazan could answer, something massive burst from the water. A serpent beast, nearly 20 feet long, rose into the air. Its scales shimmered, shifting colors like liquid metal. Its mouth opened wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth, and it let out a high-pitched screech. Daniel stumbled back. Nope. 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 The serpent beast struck. Ryazan reacted first. She grabbed Daniel and pushed him aside, dodging the creature's snapping jaws. Daniel hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet. He pulled out his blade. Though against a giant river monster, it felt about as useful as a toothpick. Ryazan leaped into action, dodging the serpent's strikes with incredible speed. She slashed at its body, her blade cutting deep, but the serpent barely reacted. Daniel's mind raced. If slashing didn't work, they needed a new plan. His eyes darted around. Then he saw it. A jagged rock overhanging the river, just above where the serpent beast was thrashing. An idea formed. A risky, probably stupid idea. But it was better than nothing. Ryazan, he shouted. Lure it toward the rocks. She didn't question him. With a swift movement, she backflipped away from the serpent, landing near the overhang. The beast followed, lunging at her. Daniel sprinted toward the rock formation, climbing up as fast as he could. The moment he reached the top, he saw his chance. The serpent beast's head was directly below him. He didn't hesitate. With a deep breath, Daniel jumped. He fell hard onto the creature's back, grabbing onto its scales. The beast screeched in fury, thrashing wildly to shake him off. Daniel held on with everything he had. He gripped his blade, raising it high, then drove it down into the serpent's eye. The creature let out an ear-splitting shriek, its body convulsing. Ryazan saw the opening and struck. She leaped forward, her blade slicing through the serpent's exposed neck. With one final cry, the serpent beast collapsed, its massive body crashing into the river. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, Daniel let out a breathless laugh. That was insane. Ryazan approached him, looking at him with something different in her golden eyes. Respect. Amusement. It was hard to tell. You are reckless, she said, but effective. Daniel grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. She nodded. It was a quiet moment. After the fight, they found a safer place by the river to rest. Daniel sat on a flat rock, staring at the crimson sky, letting the cool air wash over him. Ryazan sat nearby, sharpening her blade. After a while, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you think the others will finally respect me after this?" Ryazan didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Some will, others will not. You have proven your ability, but the Dralzek are slow to change." Daniel exhaled. "Great." She looked at him. "But I respect you." Daniel blinked. "Wait, seriously." Ryazan smirked slightly. "Do not let it go to your head, human." Daniel laughed. "No promises." For the first time, it didn't feel like he was just a fragile outsider. He was still human, still different. But maybe, just maybe, he was earning his place. And for now, that was enough. The air over Krill's forehead changed. Daniel could feel it, the subtle drop in temperature, the way the wind carried a strange electric charge. Overhead, the once clear crimson sky had darkened, now filled with rolling storm clouds that flickered with streaks of blue lightning. Ryazan stood motionless, her golden eyes fixed on the sky. "A storm is coming," she said. Daniel rubbed his arms. "Yeah, I kinda figured. This one looks bad." She nodded. "It is not just any storm. The Kralos tempest is fierce enough to tear apart mountains. If we do not find shelter before it arrives, we will not survive." Daniel's stomach tightened. Great. Another thing trying to kill them. Racing against time. The river was no longer safe. The water had started to churn violently, rising as if preparing for a flood. Ryazan led the way, moving quickly through the rocky terrain, her steps sure and steady. Daniel followed as fast as he could, pushing past exhaustion. His legs ached, his body protested, but he refused to slow down. They climbed higher into the mountains, searching for a cave or any form of natural shelter. The storm was approaching fast. The sky above rumbled, and the wind howled around them, carrying sharp grains of dust that stung Daniel's skin. There, Ryazan pointed toward a dark opening in the cliffs ahead. Daniel didn't waste time asking questions. They sprinted toward it, just as the first strike of lightning hit the ground behind them. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the air, nearly knocking Daniel off his feet. He stumbled but kept going. By the time they reached the cave, rain had started to fall. Not normal rain, but thick, almost metallic drops that sizzled against the ground. Daniel barely made it inside before the storm unleashed its full fury. Shelter in the darkness. The cave was deep and cold, stretching further into the mountain than Daniel expected. The sound of the storm echoed through the walls, but at least in here, they were safe. Daniel collapsed against a rock, breathing heavily. That was too close. Ryazan remained standing, her posture still alert. "We were fortunate to find shelter in time." Daniel let out a short laugh. "Yeah, fortunate. That's one word for it." Ryazan ignored his sarcasm and started scanning the cave. "Stay here. I will check for danger." Daniel waved her off. Yeah. Be careful." She disappeared into the shadows. Alone now, Daniel took a deep breath, letting his body relax for the first time in hours. His muscles burned from the non-stop running and fighting. He leaned his head back against the cold stone and closed his eyes for a moment. Then, a noise. Daniel's eyes snapped open. It came from deep inside the cave. A low, steady growl. His fingers tightened around his small blade. "Ryazan," he called out. No answer. The growl came again, this time closer. Daniel stood up, his heartbeat loud in his ears. His eyes tried to adjust to the darkness, but he could barely see past the entrance. Then he saw movement, a shadow shifting in the darkness. Something big. A new enemy. Before Daniel could react, the creature lunged. He barely had time to dive to the side as clawed hands swiped at the spot where he had just been standing. He hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet. His breath caught in his throat as he finally got a good look at the thing standing before him. It was a Drakon, a species he had only heard about in whispers. A massive, muscular alien, covered in thick black armor-like skin, standing nearly 9 feet tall. Its 4 glowing blue eyes locked onto him, its fanged mouth twisting into something that looked too much like a grin. It had been waiting for them to take shelter here. Daniel raised his blade, though he knew it was useless. That thing was stronger, faster, and more deadly in every way. The Drakon took a slow step forward, its claws gleaming in the dim light. Then, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Before the Drakon could react, a blur of movement shot toward it from the side. Ryuzen. She struck fast and hard, her blade slicing through the creature's thick hide. The Drakon roared in pain, spinning to attack her instead. Daniel saw his chance. He grabbed a sharp rock from the ground, and without thinking, threw it with all his strength. The rock hit the creature's face, smashing into one of its glowing blue eyes. It howled in rage, staggering back. That was all Ryuzen needed. She drove her blade straight through its chest. The Drakon let out a final, wet growl before collapsing to the ground. Silence filled the cave, except for the distant rumble of the storm outside. Daniel exhaled slowly, his heart still pounding. That was terrifying, he said. Ryuzen pulled her blade from the creature's body. Drakon are dangerous. If we had been even a second slower, we would be dead. Daniel shuddered. Yeah, thanks for saving me. Again. Ryuzen looked at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she said, "You saved me too." Daniel blinked. Wait, what? She motioned toward the wound in the creature's eye. Your attack slowed it. It gave me an opening to strike. Daniel smirked. So, does that mean we're even? Ryuzen tilted her head. Perhaps. Daniel grinned. That was close enough to a yes. A moment of truth. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cave, they had won another battle. Daniel sat down again, letting exhaustion finally take over. So what now? Ryuzen sat beside him, her golden eyes watching the flames of the small fire she had just lit. Now, she said, we wait for the storm to pass. Daniel sighed. And then, Ryuzen looked at him, her expression unreadable. And then, we see what fate has planned for us next. Daniel chuckled. With our luck, probably something trying to kill us. To his surprise, Ryuzen actually laughed, just a little. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift between them. Not just as warriors. Not just as allies. Something more. And for once, he wasn't afraid of it. The storm had finally passed. The sky over Krelosphor was no longer filled with lightning and howling winds. Instead, a soft golden glow stretched across the horizon as the twin suns began to rise. The air was cool, crisp, a moment of peace after the chaos. Daniel stood at the entrance of the cave, staring at the vast alien landscape before him. Everything looked different now. Not just the world, but him. Behind him, Ryuzen was gathering her gear, moving with the same calm precision she always did. But something had changed between them. Something unspoken but undeniable. The last step of the journey. We should keep moving, Ryuzen said, adjusting the strap on her armor. Daniel nodded. Yeah, back to the outpost. Ryuzen hesitated for the briefest moment. The outpost is not safe for you, she said. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? She met his gaze, her golden eyes steady. You have proven yourself in battle, but that does not mean the others will accept you. Many still see you as a weak outsider. Daniel crossed his arms. Then I'll prove them wrong. Ryuzen tilted her head slightly. You already have. But it may not matter. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had survived every challenge this planet had thrown at him. He had fought alongside Ryuzen, saved her, and she had saved him. And now she was telling him it still wasn't enough. That's not fair, he muttered. No, it is not, Ryazan agreed. But it is the truth. A dangerous path forward. They left the cave and began their journey back toward the mountains. The terrain was still harsh, but after everything they had been through, it felt different now. Daniel was no longer just trying to survive. He was trying to decide what came next. Ryazan walked beside him, silent as always, but Daniel could feel her watching him in the quiet moments. Finally, he asked, "What happens if I don't go back to the outpost?" Ryazan didn't answer right away. "The Drelzek Empire is not kind to outsiders," she said. "But there are other paths." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You mean running?" She shook her head. "I mean choosing your own path." Daniel sighed. "And what about you? What's your path?" Ryazan stopped walking. For the first time, she looked uncertain. "My duty was to guard you," she said quietly. That was all. Daniel took a step closer. "And now?" Ryazan held his gaze for a long moment. "Now, I do not know." Daniel swallowed. He wasn't sure what he had expected her to say, but he knew what he wanted to say. A moment of truth. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the land. Finally, Ryazan turned away. "We should keep moving." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Right, let's go." They continued toward the mountains, their footsteps the only sound in the quiet air. Then, a noise, a low rumbling in the distance. Ryazan stopped. Ships. Daniel's stomach twisted. Sure enough, in the far distance, dark shapes appeared in the sky. Drelzek patrol ships. They were heading straight for the outpost. The final decision. Ryazan's expression hardened. "They will report that you survived." Daniel exhaled sharply. "And that's bad." Ryazan turned to him, her voice serious. "If they see you as a threat, they will hunt you down. You must leave Krelos for." Daniel knew she was right, but part of him didn't want to accept it. He had fought so hard to prove himself, to earn a place, to stand beside her, and now he had to walk away. He clenched his fists. "What about you?" Ryazan hesitated. "I have a duty to my people." Daniel scoffed. "So that's it. After everything we've been through, we just go our separate ways." Ryazan looked at him, her golden eyes filled with something he had never seen before, something she was trying to hide. "It is the logical choice," she said. Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Right. Logical. But not what he wanted." One last chance. The ships were getting closer. Daniel knew he had to decide now. He could return to the outpost, knowing they would never truly accept him. Or he could leave. Start something new. But only if she came with him. "Ryazan," he said, stepping toward her. "Come with me." She stiffened. "That is." "Don't tell me it's impossible," Daniel interrupted. "You told me to choose my own path. What if my path is with you?" Ryazan's hands clenched at her sides. "It is not that simple." Daniel smiled. "Nothing ever is." For the first time, Ryazan looked unsure. She was a warrior, a soldier, bound by duty. But she was also more than that. And Daniel could see it. "Ryazan," he said softly, "you don't have to stay. You don't have to follow orders forever." She met his gaze, and for a long moment, everything else disappeared. Then, she made her choice. "I will follow," she whispered. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes. A new beginning." The ships roared closer, but Daniel and Ryazan turned away from them. Together, they ran toward the unknown. Toward something new. Toward a future neither of them had planned, but both of them had chosen. And for the first time, neither of them was alone.